We predicted in the media for months now because of the previous sell off of radio stations, but we're also calling this Black Thursday for, again, the Canadian media wars. Now, Bell Media is planning cuts to CTV, BNN, Bloomberg following the BC layoffs, sale of 45 radio stations. Now, according to CBC, Thursday's round of job cuts, and this is, of course, February 8th, is their largest in nearly 30 years since the early 1990 cutbacks, where they got rid of most of the full, what they call primetime programming from 6:30 on. Now, according to CBC, Bell Media is ending multiple television newscasts and making other programming cuts after its parent company announced widespread layoffs and the sale of 45 of its 103 regional radio stations. iHeartMedia, I guess the brand name no longer exists because they were using kind of that Clearstream company name in Canada for years, but that's no longer there. Now, what really happened here, the projected profits, which is a very controversial thing, you're not losing money, but they're not making enough money. Similar to the Noranda Falconbridge Extrata situation in the Maritimes back in the late 20th and early 21st century. Now, according again to reports, news stations such as CTV and BNA Bloomberg would be affected immediately, according to an internal memo sent to Bell Media employees on February 8th. The memo, signed by Dave Daig, Vice President of Local TV Radio at Bell Media Studios, and Richard Gray, Vice President of News at Bell Media, said weekday noon newscasts at all CTV stations except Toronto would end. Now, this could be upwards of 5,000 jobs, both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. It's also scrapping its 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. newscasts on weekends on all CTV and CTV2 stations except Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. Now, I think what's going to be happening, there will be U.S. programming taking up that instead, or it might be expanding sports. Now, Daig and Gray said multi-skilled journalists would replace news correspondent and technician teams reporting to CTV National News in Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, while other correspondent changes will be made in Ottawa. Earlier today, Bell Media's parent company BCE Incorporated announced it was cutting 9% of its workforce. The company announced Thursday in an open letter signed by Chief Executive Mirko Bibic that 4,800 jobs at all levels of the company, and these are high-paying jobs, at least six figures, would be removed. Fewer than 10% of the total job cuts are at Bell Media specifically. Now, the round of job cuts is BC's largest in nearly 30 years, Bibic added during a Thursday conference call. So that means the manifest right now, CTV, CTV2, and a myriad of networks really don't know if it's going to be all filler or basically original programming will be removed. Now, some employees have already been notified or were to be informed Thursday of being laid off, while the balance will be told by the spring. Bibic said the company will use vacancies and natural attrition to minimize layoffs as much as possible. Now, Bell is also ending evening programs, the debate, this hour and Top 3 Tonight and CTV News Channel, which will be replaced by a 4-hour news broadcast on weeknights beginning at 6 p.m., similar to what CBC does, like a repeat on the hour. At BNN Bloomberg, weekday daytime programming is being streamlined, reduce the number of separate broadcasts. Daig and Gray also said W5, which has been around as long as I've been around, will shift from a standalone documentary series to a multi-platform investigative reporting unit featured on CTV National News, ctvnews.ca, and other news programs. Now, according to Canadian Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge, during a press conference, I am extremely disappointed in Bell Canada's decision for many reasons. In the past decade, when acquisitions were allowed for those big companies to acquire TV stations or radio stations, it came with the promise that it would deliver on news content. And today they are backing away from that promise. CTV is not a public broadcaster, it's a private broadcaster. And some people complain about CBC getting money, where CTV is a private broadcaster and got the same amount of money pretty well that CBC got per capita for certain categories. Now, it marks the second major layoff at the media and TC giant or since last spring, when 6% of Bell Media jobs were eliminated and 9 radio stations were either shuttered or sold. Now, the company will divest 45 radio stations to 7 buyers, including Vista Radio, White Oaks, Durham Radio, My Broadcasting Corporation, Zoomer Media, which of course Moses Dimer Group, Arsenal Media, and Maritime Broadcasting, which I think has taken over the Woodstock, New Brunswick, and Grand Falls locations. The sales, of course, are subject to CRTC approval and other closing conditions. The stations being sold are mostly West Coast and East Coast, as well as Ontario and Quebec and Atlantic Canada. So on the Atlantic Canada side, you have Amqui Quebec, Rimouski Quebec, Grand Falls, and Woodstock, and of course Bathurst, which is the old CKBC imprint, and also Truro, Nova Scotia, where it's CKTO and CKATY again sold to Maritime Broadcasting. Now, Bell Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer Robert Malcolm said we've effectively sold off half of our radio portfolio. That's a significant divestiture, and it's because it's not a viable business anymore. We will continue to operate ones that are viable, but this is a business that is going in the wrong direction. Well, he's talking about lack of ad revenue and like a lot of people going online for fake news and news that is not local. Local news is not working in Canada right now at any level. Now, while some financial analysts anticipated that BCE would be making changes and likely laying off employees, I think these are much bigger than what people were anticipating. Patrick Horan, a portfolio manager at Agilith Capital, said in an interview with CBC News. The source of this is a dividend policy that has really been out of whack, added Horan. BCE will now pay a quarterly dividend of 99.7 cents per common share, up from 96 cents per share, the company said Thursday. Dividends are a portion of earnings that companies pay out to their shareholders, usually every quarter. Typically, the companies pay about 50% of earnings in dividends and are up to about 130% right now of their earnings. So I think that's pressuring the company to produce more free cash flow. Now, Bell Media is in the midst of a digital transformation for both entertainment and news, Sal Malcolmson, the chief legal officer. But whether or not prioritizing digital growth will be a viable way to generate profit remains to be determined. Now, the big question is, if CTV didn't have the NFL, where in the fuck would they be? Because you don't have the NHL and you don't have Major League Baseball. So there's no Major League Baseball on the regular CTV channels, which was a big draw back in the day. So they're going to have to rejig even the sports because CBC has taken over women's hockey. You have Hockey Night in Canada. You know, there's always going to be a flow. Now, he blamed the federal government for taking too long to provide relief for media companies, as well as CRTC for being slow to react to a crisis that is immediate. This extends to two pieces of legislation intending to help Canada's struggling media sector. Bill C-18, also known as the Online News Act, meant to force tech giants to compensate Canadian news outlets for the content, and Bill C-11, which updates the Broadcasting Act to require digital platforms such as Netflix, YouTube, and TikTok to contribute and promote Canadian content. Now, Thursday job losses at Bell Media are directly tied to regulatory direction on Bill C-11, Malcolmson said. Now, Ottawa remains in a standoff with Facebook parent company Meta over C-18, with the company continuing to block news links on its platforms. Meanwhile, the federal government capped the amount of money broadcast media can get from Google's $100 million annual payments at $30 million, with the remainder to go to print and digital news outlets. We've been advocating for reform for years. It's not coming fast enough, and when it does come, it doesn't provide meaningful help, said Malcolmson. Now, Bell has fought other regulatory decisions over the past year. In November, the CRTC directed telecom giants, including Bell, to give independent competitors access to high-speed fiber optic networks at regulated rates. Bell planned to appeal the decision, saying that the regulations undermine the millions the company has spent to build that network out. On Tuesday, the company reportedly asked the federal government to rescind the decision. There was also an October application to the Federal Court of Appeal seeking to overturn the CRTC decision that renewed its broadcast licenses for 3 more years. It argued that decision was made while at a public hearing, and it could result in regulatory prejudging its request last June to waive local news and Canadian programming requirements for its television stations. Now, Bell Media's advertising revenues declined by $140 million in 2023 compared to a year before, and the company's news division has bled like crazy. It's seeing more than $40 million annual operating losses, Bibick said in this letter. He added during the Thursday call that the company is shifting our focus away from overtly regulated parts of our business. We want to deliver news, but we want to find a way to make this work. Yeah, he said, adding that news companies are facing increasing competition from tech giants, now navigating an advertising slump and the decline of traditional broadcast media. On Thursday, Bell said it would also further scale back network investments on its telecom side as it remains at odds with the CRTC over what it calls predetermined regulatory direction. Asked about the company's image in light of continued cuts, Malcolmson noted the size of Bell's executive team has been reduced in the recent years, and executive salaries remain frozen, but they're still quite high. Now, I'm a 41-year veteran of the media wars in Canada. I work for every media company. The only media company I never worked for was CTV, but I was working with Canadian Press, so I was feeding them copy. But you got to understand, in 2024, let's put this in perspective. CTV is buying all these American programs or syndication, right? They're taking the high road. When's the last time you saw a British show on CTV? CBC fills out the programming and competitive with CTV and other channels, but you have agreements with various myriad international channels, and CBC is selling more stuff in syndication. CTV is selling some of his items in syndication, but the news division, there's nobody that thinks in a right mind CTV is better news than CBC. Everybody turns to CBC because local is what they do. Now, the year that CBC tried to get rid of local news programming was almost bankrupt the company if they learned their lesson. Now, I know the people out there, oh, it's CBC's this, CBC's that, it's fake news and bullshit. But you got to understand, to get two voices, if CTV is a right-wing voice, where's Polyev going to go? If you cut back, there's no coverage on the daily or the evening broadcast for Polyev into the next election. And the CBC's not going to give promotion to Polyev because basically said, if I win, I'm getting rid of the CBC. So you do the math on that. Where was Polyev to take to support the centrist and right-wing views of CTV? Global doesn't have any great publicity. National Post is not going to launch in Canada. There's no way the CRTC is going to allow a Fox-type news channel in Canada, and it's not really available to anybody because Bell has most of the channels. So this is what's going to happen. They're going to get away from news, just like the old days. They're going to get more into programming. They're going to pick up U.S. soap operas, U.S. Syndication, but like the baby channels, like the super channels across Canada, CHCH and different ones, they might benefit the most from this because they're on a budget. They don't have to make millions and millions of dollars. If you're looking at Hamilton, Ontario news that's broadcast across Canada, you look at NTV. Okay, you look at the city channels, right? City's still around. You look at the independent channels as well. There's quite a few across Canada. So you might see a growth in independent channels, but right now, CTV is they got so fat from 30 years ago, and they became bloated, and they really don't listen to the viewers. CTV does not have a news system that draws in people. They never built. At least with CBC Canada, they have various, like, okay, CTV doesn't have a documentary channel, CBC documentary channel. They don't have as good as CBC Gem. You go on CBC Gem, it's similar to Tubi or BritBox or whatever. But CTV, the streaming, they're behind in that too. Okay? And now that sports is going to be on one big streaming channel, where does it leave CTV? It's like this. The biggest guy at the bar doesn't win the fight. CBC knows how to last. They've survived the internet. They've survived cutbacks. They survived Brian Mulroney. They survived Stephen Harper, who's still here. It's like a cockroach. CTV's not like a cockroach. CTV's like a spider. And like most spiders, you throw a brick on the spider, it's going to crush him. Cockroach, I don't think so. But if you're a right winger that thinks CTV is going to get Polyev in, you're going to be bleeding. In the next year and a half, you think CBC is going to over publicize Polyev. It's not going to happen. So where are they going to go? You can't make their own channel because CRTC regulates that. So they could be fucked. So, but all the different members of the media we've lost, and there's some good people. But I think Maritime Broadcasting could be the big winner here because I like their structure. I like the people there. So we'll yet to see. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're from the States, it doesn't really apply to you. But if I told you that NBC was going tits up and firing all its media, and like Fox is in trouble too because they're dumping money makers because it costs too much. In the next 5 years with inflation and all that, who knows what's going to happen? We might have one TV channel across Canada that does like full-time news, and it might be CBC. So, ladies and gentlemen, keep your stick in the ice, and don't forget if you're looking for a good worker, some of those Bell Media workers in production and stuff like that, narrators, might be a good time to track them down. There could be some good workers there. Thanks for listening, and like I said, if you like what we're doing here, On good news and bad news days, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share.